Good evening, everybody. This is Yana Benoon and Steven Benoon with Israeli News Live, and we have guest Deborah Tavares with few updates. We have named this show Climate Change is the Vaccine for COVID-19. As strange as it may sound. Welcome, Deborah. Can you please explain to us why we have decided for this name for the show?
Well, absolutely. For those of you that are listening again, Deborah Tavares with StopTheCrime.net. Please subscribe to our YouTube video channel and tap on the bell notifications so you'll get updates such as what you are going to hear right now on Israeli News Live. This is a document from the World Economic Forum, and the title of this 8-page discussion is called "The COVID-19 Recovery Can Be the Vaccine for Climate Change." I'm going to read that again. You can type this in for yourself and find it on the World Economic Forum website. Again, the name, "The COVID-19 Recovery Can Be the Vaccine for Climate Change." Now, this is dated June the 9th of 2020. So this is a very, very new disclosure of how they're going to manipulate all of us into the diabolical requirements of sustainable development, moving us back into the year 1750 and surviving what is left for us to survive on, because there will be very little of any resources left. But here we go. Here's what they're saying in the document. They say there are positive environmental benefits of the pandemic, and they have shown us what is possible. Our actions or inactions now will shape human existence for generations to come. Here's what policy and decision makers must focus on to build the future we all need. COVID-19 was not just a predictable crisis. It was predicted. An array of official guidelines for pandemic preparedness and response from the World Health Organizations and others have highlighted just how seriously the threat was perceived. And they go on to say that in the U.S., which currently has far more cases than any other country, and all of you may know right now how the EU is not allowing Americans to travel to the EU.
Yes.
Brazilians or Russians.
Yes.
And that is what they're saying. And here to the extent that, again, they're saying in the U.S., which currently has far more cases and deaths than any other country, the Obama administration notably left a 69-page pandemic game plan in place for the incoming administration to no avail. They go on to say that what is most concerning about COVID-19 is it will be a harbinger of things to come. Climate change, a quandary of our own making. Now I'm going to pause right here. Climate change is the use of weapon technologies that are being used to massively reconstruct our weather events. Now, most of you know this. So it's important to tell your children while you still can the truth about climate change. And I've covered this in many videos in the past. So again, it reads on page 2, "Climate change, a quandary of our own making, is set to become the worst crisis of our times. If we fail to appreciate our collective vulnerability and responsibility to act accordingly, the consequences will shape human lives and civilization for millennium." COVID-19 and the climate. There are clear connections between COVID-19 and the climate crisis. For starters, climate change increases the likelihood of COVID-type pandemics. Through changes in the habitats of disease vectors disasters, for example, or increased interspecies contact resulting from deforestation. Now, I'm going to add this. Deforestation, by and large, is the reduction of the trees and plant material by the continuous multi-year assault of overhead aerial spraying. Many of you know it as chemtrailing, but many also call it geoengineering. And it is the deliberate large-scale manipulation of the Earth's climate. And it is causing deforestation. And in fact, I'll add this, there are many countries that are being given millions and millions of dollars to plant trees. You cannot plant trees in the soils that we have and have them grow without failing. In fact, I will add this right now. For those of you that have any large trees near your home or workshops, get the wind load reduced in them immediately. Reduce the sail in the trees. Because as you'll hear as I go through this document, we're going to have cascading disasters that are far beyond anything we've ever known in the past. So prepare. Know that your trees will be used as part of a weapons system. So I'm going to continue. They say climate change vastly increases the likelihood of cascading disasters. In the case of COVID-19, health impacts won't stop at infection itself, but will be amplified by broad economic and social fallout. Last year in 2019, they're telling us that we all witnessed devastating heat waves in Europe and unprecedented wildfires in Australia. And I'll add, they don't have that in here. The devastating wildfires in California. And there were thousands of deaths due to a cyclone off the southeastern coast of Africa and a host of other extreme weather events. They say that in 2020, that climate change will deliver similar shocks to societies now already handicapped by the economic impacts of the epidemic, with stretched emergency management capabilities and depleted health systems. And they tell us that over longer time frames, COVID-19 will have serious physical and mental health consequences through its effect on the global economy, on global and regional food systems, and on available resources for disaster response and social protection. They say the World Bank currently estimates that there will be 40 to 60 million people that will be driven into extreme poverty in 2020. Now, remembering that this was information that was released on June the 9th, 2020. They go on to talk about how climate change will generate events that escalate and proliferate from multiple breadbasket failures, in other words, massive food declines, to climate-induced conflicts and refugee crises. So we're going to see people forcibly moved from their homes and their villages and towns because they have been hit by a weapon system called climate change. They go on to tell us COVID-19 is in many ways unpredicted by climate change threats to produce shocks of greater magnitude that play out over longer time frames, as highlighted in the IPCC special report, Global Warming of 1.5 degrees centigrade. They say without sufficient action, the long-term impacts of climate crisis on health and the economy will play out year after year. For example, heat itself will cost global economies more than $2 trillion by the year 2030. So I want you to hear that. Heat. They're heating up the environment with electromagnetic frequencies and all part of what is being done in HAARP and a variety of assaults on us through satellite weapon systems as well. That's my words. So again, the economies via heat will suffer $2 trillion by the year 2030, with losses in some countries of 6% or more of GDP. They say the WHO warns that air pollution from sources that also contribute significantly to the climate crisis will cost nearly $3 trillion. Now, I bring all of your attention to the massive dust storm that is coming over the Atlantic and covering the Caribbean right now and is headed for a number of states in the United States. A massive dust storm being created. And that's why I keep referring to the climate action plans that your illegitimate corporate city structures have adopted for you. Because in your city, it will tell you this climate action plan. And for an example, I would type in Sonoma County, California, climate action plan. And boom, there are a number of different plans. And in those plans, I will see all of the type of weather events, viruses, prions, etc., that will occur here due to climate change, which is a consortium of weapons systems converging on all of us. We are in a massive, massive reset, and we're heading into something more diabolical than any of us can possibly imagine. So I'm going to stay on now with this. They say again that heat will cost trillions and trillions. We've already seen that. I want to alert everybody right now to the increasing power outages that United States and other countries worldwide will experience. The grids will be going down intentionally because they're shifting the traditional sources of energy off of hydroelectric onto renewables only, solar, wind, and wave and geothermal. And none of those renewables are cost effective. They're very expensive, and they are all controlled by weapons. So they are unpredictable, and this is the intention. We're being moved covertly into a system that we will not survive under unless you take massive, massive moves now to become as self-reliant in that regard as possible. But they go on to talk about the intersection of COVID-19 and climate is complex. Some factors that cause climate change are worsening the pandemic, they're telling us. Outcomes of infection are more serious in areas where populations have been exposed to air pollution. So I go back to the horrific dust storm that has already blanketed the Caribbean and is now headed towards many states in the United States right now to cause lung damage, and they say COVID-like symptoms. And a week or so ago, there was a story that this dust cloud literally covered the Mediterranean, and that people were told that they had unprecedented weather events, and they needed to stay indoors with air purifiers. So for those of you that do not have an air purifier, you need to get one, but make sure that it is not a Wi-Fi compatible air filter. You do not want to operate these things from your cell phone. You do not. So let me then continue. So again, the outcome of infections, they tell us, will be more serious in areas where populations are exposed to air pollution, and they are exposing us to air pollution. Air pollution is responsible for 7 million premature deaths per year. This is what they're saying. Responsible for 7 million premature deaths per year, according to the WHO, the World Health Organization. Often as a risk factor of other conditions, we have long known that many of the underlying drivers of climate change have wide-ranging repercussions for health. The pandemic response, they say, has led to cleaner air during the crisis and has avoided almost 11,000 deaths in Europe alone because of our confinement. And they say globally, greenhouse gas emissions are projected to fall by 5.5% this year in 2020, okay, because of the lockdown. a consequence of the confinement of over 3 billion people at home and the corresponding economic jolt. And yet, even this massive reduction will not yield a trajectory to limit global warming down to the required 1.5 degrees Celsius. According to the latest science, we would have to increase the reduction to 7.6% reduction per year. The transformations requiring this are truly colossal. This is what they're saying on page 4. So what we've experienced now with the lockdown and the massive amount of foreclosures we're going to see, and businesses going out of business, and people not being able to drive their cars, not being able to travel on planes, is not enough. Is not enough. So they go on. COVID-19 has led to experiments at all scales. It has changed the way people live, work, and move. Their relationships with government, I will add this. Our bigger government now is in charge for our safety. But they say that our relationships with government and employment, and in some cases, it has accelerated existing trends. Yes, this is what COVID is being used for. It is a shoehorn to bring in diabolical genocidal policies of UN Agenda 21 and 30 and beyond, all the sustainability requirements, and I have learned much more than even this. But to name a few in this document, they say, remote working has become the norm. More consumer purchasing has moved online, and cities are experimenting with converting streets to accommodate walking and cycling, and international travel has virtually ceased. This is a good thing they're telling us, because we are reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. We are being shut down. They're also telling us that more than 700 companies globally have signed a host of open letters to world leaders calling on them to ensure that economic stimulus packages tackle both the impacts of the coronavirus and the ongoing climate crisis. In other words, they're going to fund the technologies used for our demise. That's where this money is going. This is also where 401k money has gone, pension money has gone, through a horrific shadow bank called BlackRock, and that's going to be covered in another show. But this document goes on to say that over 4,500 health professionals and more than 350 organizations representing at least 7 million health workers worldwide have urged the leaders of the G20 to ensure a green recovery. So I will just outline what a green recovery is. Basically, I do have a 3-part video YouTube series of a PowerPoint I put together and presented in the UK a little over a year ago. You can listen to the diabolical aspects of what a green recovery is. Many of you are well aware, but it is absolutely eliminating the use of petroleum, which they refer to as fossil fuels. Eliminating all fossil fuels. Eliminating all diesel. They're saying diesel free by 33. Also eliminating propane. They're also saying in documents, and not in this one, but I'm going to tell you, that they don't want us using generators because of the dirty fuel that is required in generators when our power goes out, or we need to try to keep the lights on or keep our refrigerators running in blackouts. Because we were told here that the air quality management in San Francisco said that our air quality was greatly impacted by the thousands of people that went out and bought generators after our fires here in November of 2019. we were hit with directed energy weapons. It was an arson attack. And at the same time, our utility company, which is Rothschild, Pacific Gas and Electric, turned our power off. So people were trying to survive with generators. So going back now to this document, they say, adopt a science-based net zero strategy. So I think it's really important for people to understand net zero in their terminology is the reuse of energy that you bring into your home, and then you convert and you utilize it without having an impact on that utilization. We've been to some wineries here in Northern California that lay claim to being net zero energy use wineries. And it is very interesting to see what they say and how they qualify for net zero energy. But we've always known that energy comes from somewhere. It does not, we can't go to aiming for zero, because the real goal of energy use is aiming for zero. And what we have to understand, this is the ultimate goal, is not to use energy. Most efficient energy is energy we do not use or generate. And this is not a technology. It is a behavior modification, or learning to live a new reality. Now, I took this off of the U.S. Department of Energy website a number of years ago, and I have featured what I've just talked about in a number of my videos. They say in here, sustainability is not the same thing as zero energy. There is no such thing as zero energy. Energy does not exist vacuum. It always comes from somewhere and goes somewhere. So what is being discussed in all of these documents is eliminating energy, people. That's what these documents are about. These are the largest genocide policies ever put forth over every country, in every city, in every state, worldwide. So now let's go back to this COVID document. They, again, talk about science-based pathways to reach net zero emissions. In the process, this will create a 100% clean energy system, accelerate the transition to zero carbon mobility, build the zero carbon heavy industries of the future, and harness the potential of natural climate solutions. We don't have natural climate anymore. We have structures called clouds that are created. We have weapons systems that are destroying the ecosystem. All the seas are acidified now. Plant material and plankton and fish are dying. When I was recently traveling to Cuba on a ship, I didn't see one dolphin. I didn't see anything. And when I was on our family boat years before, they would follow our boat. We saw them everywhere. In fact, when I went through the passageway of Gibraltar between the English Channel, Gibraltar, and Africa, it felt like I could walk on the fish's backs because there were so many coming in and out of that very narrow, as I recall, a 19-mile wide passageway. But they say the economy and the stimulus in the wake of COVID-19 should be dedicated into enabling the pathways. They say to better account for and address current health crisis risks. They go on to tell us that the global health security frameworks must encompass all hazards, including those arising from climate change. Preparing for and addressing these risks require fostering collective, committed planning and prevention for global threats across all nations of the world and all stakeholder domains. They say that they have to redesign cities for better lives. This is on page 6 of that 8-page document. Redesign cities for better lives. COVID-19 has made visible the deep vulnerabilities and inequities that pervade so many of our cities our urban ways of life. They say that stimulus responses to COVID-19 must promote healthier air, healthier mobility. I'm going to add this. No mobility at all. That's what is considered to be healthy. We are to be in a continuous lockdown. Why do you think they're collapsing the restaurants and then allowing a loosening up and a reopening of usage of only 25 to 50% of their original floor space? And then many restaurants are having to invest in outdoor patio furniture during the summer so that they can seat people outside where they're being told they need to sit outside to prevent COVID. And these people are in hopes that we're going to reopen and expand faster, when in fact many of these people are in such financial shock over the lockdown and trying to create businesses and continue with their businesses that they have their heart and souls in. While there's just going to be a resurgence, and they're asset stripping all these people right now with the hopes and dreams that things will come back to normal, we're not ever going to see our lives back in January and February of 2020 ever again. So I'm going back to this document because they talk about promoting healthier air. Again, that is eliminating all travel by air. It's also eliminating mobility. And they say we have to have a healthier work and healthier play, among others. Well, healthier work means that you telecommute. You do not go to your work, your brick and mortar buildings anymore. That is the reality. In fact, I've talked about that many, many times over the years of what has occurred in the document that I've discussed called Future Strategic Issues, Future Warfare Circa 2025. And I'm going to bring that back right now, but I do want to say a couple of things about the monitoring system. Now, I'm no longer discussing the COVID document at this point. Again, you can go and look at that for yourself, and I wish you would. Again, it is on the World Economic Forum website, and it's entitled, The COVID-19 Recovery Can Be the Vaccine for Climate Change. Now, you heard me only discuss excerpts out of that document. And you must understand when you read this document and they talk about your health, it's based around the health of doing business for the corporate structure that is void of morality, void of ethics, and void of concern for human life. There's a very big difference in this corporate structure that we all now find ourselves in, USA Inc. and Earth Inc. We're not in a system that we have been sabotaged and programmed into believing that we're in. So you have to read the words correctly because they have changed the words on us. I also want to add this. We're hearing here in Northern California that there's an exponential increase of COVID in the Hispanic communities. And certainly we know that there are food supplies being literally targeted to certain lower ethnic areas. So there are more toxic foods delivered intentionally in many low-income areas. Sadly, they are the low-hanging fruit, and sadly, they are being attacked. Despite what you hear with all the protesting that's going on right now, all the documents talk about is the enormous decline in the third world living conditions as a result of massive climate change events in those areas and parts of the world. But it is happening here in the United States and every other nation. It's happening everywhere. So I'm going to talk about what was said recently at a finance ministers and central bank meeting in Washington, D.C. The International Monetary Fund had a message for all of them. We're talking about the the central bankers and the IMF. And they said the message is for them, digital. C's are on your doorstep. And we're facing a global reset on every single legacy area that we've ever known. Everything that we have ever been taught is going to be turned upside down, even more so than the effects of the lockdown. We need to understand that. And I can only urge all of you to do what you can do when you start to understand the enormity of what we face. Certainly we need to pray. We need to form groups of understanding so that we have support in this unthinkable reality that we're finding ourselves in. Evil, evil reality. I'm now looking at a document, and I want to just discuss this briefly, because water is going to be a huge issue going forward, where we're not going to have enough access of water and or food and or of electricity. So you need to prepare in any way you can around the topic of water. I will say to you that I am looking at a document. It was a press release back in 2003, and they were talking about the need of water in 2025 to prevent crises and conflicts in the West. And this is from a U.S. Department of Interior website. And I found in this document maps of some of the states in the western United States. And the Department of Interior has military segments. They have SWAT teams and so forth. And they have a map of areas that will be under attack because they won't give up their water usage. And I have that map presented in a number of videos over the years. I've been showing that map. It's diabolical. It is diabolical. But that's going to face all of you, because they're trying to convince all of us that water is in finite supply. In other words, just like petroleum, which is a renewable, water is a renewable also. And they sold the illusion, Rockefeller sold the illusion on petroleum that it was a fossil fuel. And those monies are being used to destroy the world. We have been so brainwashed, and the use of science has been so perverted that it is causing this kind of threat, immediate threat, upon all of us. So I have a number of videos. One that would show this document is called Water Wars, Stealing Water for Profit and Power. You can find that on YouTube. And I, again, want to say this because I think this is utmost important to be reminded of on a continual basis. State and federal governments are not real. They are a network of corporate structures called governments. The government, as we have been taught, does not exist. It does not exist, or what we face would not be happening. And that fundamentally was one of the most important aspects of my journey, was discovering that. And I want to remind all of you right now, I've said this before, and it bears saying again. The Center for Disease Control is a private for-profit corporation doing business. It's not a government health advocacy organization. It is a corporation. It's listed on Dun & Bradstreet and headquartered in the state of Georgia. It has ties to Big Pharma. And the CDC's recommendations are strictly aligned with their bottom line fiscal profit structure of selling and advocating vaccines. And I will tell you that the task force that serves the President of the United States, Fauci and Deborah Birx, the whole group, are all affiliated with the CDC and the WHO. So is my local health officer here in Sonoma County, California. I looked her up, Sandria Mays, and found she was delivered directly to us out of the WHO and the CDC. So here's what is important to remember about your local public health officer, the medical tyranny that is coming down on all of us to destroy business as we have known it. Here's what's important to know about your local health institution. They are also private, for-profit corporations doing business. And the medical clinic records are shared with the state and public health departments, which are also for-private corporations listed on Dun & Bradstreet. And they receive monetary compensation from the Center of Disease Control to perform their functions. So it's important to always remember that your local public health officer and organization and state public health departments' recommendations and actions are influenced by the fiscal health of their own corporation. So if you remember nothing more, it's to remember that we are a network of corporate structures that, again, are void of ethics, morality, or concern for life itself. And I know that we talked prior to the show, Yana, about a very sad article that I saw here in our local paper. Would you like for me to go over that?
Yes, I would like to. I would like to thank you for reminding us we have no government. Thank you for that. And one more thing before we go into this persecution of Christian organization in your area. However,
Yes.
I would like for you to, for just maybe a minute or two, address this. Yesterday, I have informed people who follow our news that they just released officially the new term for refugees. They're called climate change refugees. In the article that I have read for people, it said that this type of a phrase never existed before. We never had climate change refugees. We had war refugees and, all kinds of refugees, but never climate change refugees. Now, you have talked about this before.
Yes, I have.
Yes, you did. And I would like to remind our listeners that this article was talking about other countries and refugees coming to Europe and United States. However, I believe, based on what documents you are researching, Deborah, that climate change refugees will be within United States. Am I correct? Like American people will become climate change refugees.
Well, we already are.
Right.
Look at all of the levees that have been trounced upon by the new term of atmospheric rivers. We had a horrific flood here in January of 2019 here in Northern California, where they parked an atmospheric river overhead and dumped so much water that it caused massive releases of untreated sewer water and pharmaceuticals and urine into the low-lying Laguna area, which literally flooded out part of a small town, went through businesses, destroyed a number of businesses, and then went on down, the toxins went on down the Russian River out to the Pacific Ocean. So for those of you, the Russian River runs along the edge of Bohemian Grove here in Northern California. So if you are near a wastewater treatment plant, be forewarned. They are being used as a weapon system. And I will tell you that it is an executive order to build more wastewater treatment plants, to literally have us drink our urine and fecal and pharmaceutical and other contaminants of emerging concern. This is a plan. And I was stunned when I briefly looked into the millions and millions of dollars right now to create jobs in your towns that are being used to build water for reuse. They call it recycled or reuse or new water. And they tell us the benefit of drinking this water is that we won't have the consequences of a drought.
Wow.
Because we can continue to use and drink our deadly wastewater. Now, another aspect of how wastewater will be utilized, many of the documents talk about how they will dump it in uphill streams and rivers, and it will flow into the reservoirs, and it will be a blend. And it will be served up in municipal water supply, along with fluoride and other horrible chemicals, chlorine and all the rest, all the chemtrailing that is posited in these cauldrons called reservoirs. Now, I want to say this is important, and then I want to get into what happened here with this Christian organization in Northern California. But please remember that the U.S. Public Health Service 70 years ago endorsed fluoridating the water supply in the United States, and over 200 million Americans on public water systems have been affected, and this causes neurological impairment. And there was recently a lawsuit brought forth to try to recognize that process, and I don't know the consequence of this lawsuit, because I haven't seen anything in bold headlines that there was a victory in acknowledging that fluoride is a neurotoxin. I can only assess at this moment that that's not going to be a victory because in the court system, because we have to understand that the judges are private employed administrators called judges doing the bidding of the controllers, and that is what our court system is. So I wanted to go into this article today. This came out in my local newspaper. It's a story about some thrift stores that were under attack during the health order to close. And they wanted to consider themselves an essential business because they were an outreach for emotionally disturbed people here in the Santa Rosa, Sonoma County area. It was a nonprofit, and they served many functions for some of the disadvantaged in our area. And the county here came down hard on this organization called Crossing the Jordan. And it has been massively attacked by the county. And they are now being forced to close all of their stores. They've announced this today because they can't withstand the lawsuit that this evil system and the county board of supervisors and how they've come down on a group that has always been there to help others. This is how evil shows and expresses itself. Closing up, forcing this business that held many businesses out of business. I also want to talk about, again, the travel bans are widening. We're hearing that Florida, Texas, and California have massive increases of infections of COVID. So we're going to have to watch closely the types of travel bans that could potentially ensue in those states, such as closing the borders. And we already have the borders closed on Mexico only for business. The borders closed now for us to travel in Canada, again, only for essential business. And now Americans are not allowed to fly into the EU. We're certainly waiting to hear specifically what the EU has to say. But this is a global lockdown. This is all part of the climate change and what I was discussing about COVID-19 and eliminating all travel on all levels, including your vehicles. That's going to be a massive disruption when suddenly you're not able to fill your gas tanks, and that will be happening. That will be happening. So there was also another article, Yana, that I spoke about also prior to the show, and I wanted to just go over this because I found it interesting that it appeared in our local newspaper. back on February 18th of 2020, basically just prior to the lockdowns. And it was on the front page of our newspaper, which is a Illuminati, Rothschild, New World Order rag paper, as they all are. But it says this: Latin America, devices let CIA monitor groups. It says the files reveal agencies had a front row seat to deadly abuses by dictators. And they specifically talk about how South America military dictatorships combined forces in the late 70s onto a continent-wide crackdown they called Operation Condor, C-O-N-D-O-R, against perceived threats to their rule. It was part of a broader wave of violence in which nuns and priests were imprisoned, dissidents were tossed out of airplanes by the thousands that disappeared, and of course tossed out without parachutes. They also talk about how they coordinated brutal campaigns, and Argentina, Chile, and other countries established a secret communications network using encryption machines from a Swiss company called Crypto AG. Crypto AG. Crypto AG was secretly owned by the CIA as part of a decade-long operation with West German intelligence. The U.S. spy agency was, in effect, supplying rigged communication gear to some of the South America's most brutal regimes. And as a result, they tell us, a unique position to know the extent of the atrocities was known by the U.S. government through the CIA. They knew. They go on to talk about how the CIA connection to Condor was detailed in documents obtained by the Washington Post, and as well as additional files unearthed by researchers at the National Security Archives in Washington. What the document doesn't show is any substantial effort by the United States to disclose these horrific events that were occurring. And they go on to talk about, as a result, the documents highlight one of the internal dilemmas of espionage. Is there an obligation to intervene or expose illegal or violent actions, even if doing so might jeopardize a precious intelligence stream? Now, I'm going to ask all of you right now to ask yourself that question. Do we remain in silence, which is our consent, or do we stand up for the very last breath we take to always do the next best right thing every single day, and to love the ones we love the most even more, and to pray? What do you do when you know what you know? Do you remain silent?
Thank you, Deborah. We do not remain silent. We need to know the schemes of our enemy. We need to educate on this. And I cannot thank you enough for taking the time to go through all of these documents where they are describing their plans, because it takes time, it takes effort, and it certainly has a certain, you have to mentally take it in and then give it to people. And you are, explaining to people everything in such a precise, clear way. And we thank you so much. I mean, each one of us has certain gifts, and your gift is certainly research and reading of these documents and then presenting them to us. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, Deborah, for doing all that you do. If you would be so kind, can you please tell people again how to find you? I know that most people now know how to find you. The ones that listen to our broadcasts, they know you and they know how to find you. But for those who are new, can you please again tell us your websites and how they can find you?
Yes, stopthecrime.net. And we have a very broad, deep website. And I discuss targeted individuals in depth. And targeted individuals are people by the millions that have been assaulted by a black underground system.
Yes.
I would say counterintelligence evil of enslavement and torture, where directed energy weapons are used, where gangs are assigned to cities and to a single person.
You know, we talked about this, Deborah, and I would like to keep this for another show where we could probably have another, just a special show just on this information alone, on targeted individuals, because you have so much knowledge and experience, and I would like to have a show on that separately.
Well, we will do that. So my website is stopthecrime.net. Please spend time there. Also, primarywater.org. Please share the truth of water far and wide, because very soon you're going to be told we're running out of water. And water will be allocated, and you won't get enough.
Yes.
So I, again, want to thank you, Yana, and your husband, Steve, as well, for the courage that it takes to walk in this information and the time that it takes to get this information out. I'm in lockstep with understanding what this process is like. And I just want to thank you. And for everyone that's listening, I know this material is very, very difficult to absorb. Take your time, take a deep breath, and understand and think about what you're going to decide to do with this truth that you are hearing. You need to make a decision and stand in truth.
Yes.
Because, again, Dr. Stan used to always say on his radio show, it's reality, not illusion or delusion, that will determine what the future will be.
Yes.
So again, thank you both.
Thank you so much again. Thank you for listening. And we will have Deborah again for more updates. And you all have a very good evening. Thank you.